Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Whether you are in a leadership position or not, whether you are a business owner or an employee, you most likely understand the importance and the value of motivation, especially when it comes to the workplace. Let's start with some basic as far as motivation goes. For those of you who have ever taken a psychology class, you are probably familiar, you might remember that there are two types of motivation that are often discussed, and those are intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. First, intrinsic motivation. As the name suggests, this is the type of motivation that is rooted from the inside. It's internal in nature. It is often related to inherent or internal value that one assigns to something. It's often related to things such as purpose, pride, mastery, interest in something, or curiosity about something. Again, it's internally driven. Intrinsic motivation is often related to one's interests and values, and frankly, it has a greater sustainability, greater staying power in terms of comparison of different types of motivation. It's no surprise that intrinsic motivation, or employees that are motivated internally, are much more likely to stay within an organization than those who are mostly or completely motivated by extrinsic values or factors. That's an important point for both employers and employees to remember. On the other end of the spectrum, we have extrinsic motivation. As the name implies, the motivating factors tend to be outside of the self. They may be related to rewards or punishment. Things such as money or benefits are important extrinsic motivators for many. Rewards, recognition, one's career, those all can be considered extrinsic motivation. At the same time, things such as punishment or the desire to avoid punishment, which is an external variable, can also be seen as part of that extrinsic motivation world. Something to remember about extrinsic motivation is that sometimes those factors that are external to us can contribute to or even lead to increased stress and anxiety. Again, this is another one of those points that are particularly important when we look at the workplace. When it comes to the workplace, it's important to realize that it is the combination of those intrinsic and extrinsic motivators or factors that can yield the best results, both in terms of the outcomes, the work quality, but also the satisfaction that an individual experiences at work. So the takeaway is to seek out the best combination that serves everyone involved and that benefits both employer and employee. So while motivation may, at the surface, seem like something that an employer should really worry about and focus on. It is not solely the employer's responsibility or their interest to dive into the world of motivation. Individual employees have just as much to gain by understanding motivation and applying what they understand and what they learn in such ways that it benefits both them, their experience, as well as the organization. When it comes to the workplace, goals are often part of the conversation, part of the dialogue. So as we look at motivation, it's important to understand that intrinsic motivation is most likely aligned with personal goals for individuals. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is something that tends to be associated with external goals, external benchmarks, things related to the organization. Those in management and leadership positions will do well to understand motivators and the difference between intrinsic and, of course, extrinsic motivation, and what works for their employees, both collectively and individually. When it comes to feedback, for example, intrinsic motivation thrives off of constructive feedback. This is an important piece of information for anyone in management or leadership positions. But there's a flip side to feedback. If you want to deal with extrinsic motivation, then engaging in formal performance evaluation is the way to go. And of course, if we were to look at feedback in itself, it is a combination of both that will yield the best results. And that, of course, will be the case as well when we look at the combination of both intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. As we look further into the idea of motivation at the workplace and understanding how to apply different ways of motivating employees, individuals, for best results, for best experiences, we can also look at the importance of aligning employees, their talents, and their interests with specific tasks. And while extrinsic motivators can be very powerful, it is not a surprise that intrinsic motivators often win over external factors. This is pure gold when it comes to understanding employees and how to help them to be successful and satisfied at work. Understanding motivation allows leaders and managers to truly provide the kind of feedback, the kind of reward systems, the kind of recognition that yields the best results, results that benefit the organization and its workforce. The other part of this, of course, is understanding what causes motivation to decrease for individuals. What kind of factors demotivate people? The reality is that as an employer, you can do all the right things trying to motivate your workforce. But if you're overlooking or missing out on things that work against you, things that decrease motivation, then you may not realize the damage that could be caused in those situations. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, while motivation and all the responsibilities and benefits that come with it may seem like a topic of conversation reserved solely for leadership or for management, for employers, individual employees also have the responsibility and the opportunity to understand what motivates them. This allows them to help to create a better experience for themselves at the workplace. It allows for the right conversations, for conversations with their employer that produce the best results, that are productive in nature. So as you start to think about motivation and the workplace experience in terms of motivation, remember that this is a topic and an opportunity that's equally important for employers as it is for employees. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Some of the most basic and commonly recognized types of motivation are internal and external, or intrinsic and extrinsic motivation types. While intrinsic motivation is often based on things like personal goals, preferences, passions, purpose, and interest, extrinsic motivation is based on more external factors, things such as rewards, punishments, benefits, pay, recognition, and career. Understanding motivation is just as important for employers as it is for employees, as is understanding that while intrinsic motivation can lead to things such as increased job satisfaction or a lower turnover rate within an organization, extrinsic motivators can sometimes contribute to stress and anxiety. Leaders and managers will do well to understand how feedback and motivation are related. And of course, a combination of proper internal and external motivations tend to yield the best results for both the organization and the individual employees. As the week unfolds, I invite you to consider motivation in your own experience, whether you are looking at motivation as a manager or a leader or an individual employee. There's much room for learning and application. As is often the case, good, productive communications are key for best results. This is why it's so important for both employees and employers to have a good understanding of motivation at work. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of the podcast. In addition to the video version of the podcast, my YouTube channel also has videos that focus on effective stress management. So I invite you to check out Stress Free with Dr. G on YouTube. The link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.